Hi, Photo Ones. How's everybody doing out there? Hope you're well. Hope you've enjoyed our project so far. We are winding down and coming to the end of the semester, and this is one of our last. And for seniors, it is your last project. The rest of us, we might have one more in there after this one, but seniors, this is it for you. It's your last one. So I'm excited to see what you guys do with this, and I've been kind of saving this one for the end. So this is your portrait photography project. I always start this project by asking everyone, how many of you have taken a photograph of a person before? And inevitably everyone raises their hand because we've all taken a picture of a person, right? And then the secondary question to that is, but have you taken a portrait of a person? So ask yourself that right now. Have you taken a portrait? And what's the difference between a picture of a person and that person's portrait? Well, here it is, you guys. What is a portrait? The difference between an image of a person and their portrait is the intention of the photographer to capture that person's true character. So showing us, who that person is in this portrait is important. Letting them have their personality and their character and showing that in their portrait is what turns just a picture of a person into that person's actual portrait. This portrait right here is of artist Salvador Dali, who was kind of a crazy man. He did some really crazy surrealist paintings. He did the clocks that were melting. He did the elephants with the long legs. He was kind of nuts. So this is a great portrait of him with his crazy mustache and his crazy eyes. And, the photographer telling us, this is the kind of guy that he is. So that's your goal in these portraits. Show us who your person actually is. So let's talk about what types of portraits there are. The first type of portrait is called an environmental portrait. Now, when I say the word environmental, I don't want you to go back to the nature project we just finished, because I'm not talking about taking pictures outside. That's not what the word environmental means. The word environmental means a picture of that person in the environment where they spend most of their time, where they feel most comfortable, where they belong, right? So, if I were to walk into Dr. Lane's office and take a picture of him behind his desk, that would be his environment, right? This is a great type of portrait to take because you can get your model feeling very comfortable because they seem to feel comfortable where they spend most of their time in their environment. So you could take advantage of that and take a really nice casual portrait of them doing something that they usually do, maybe not like static posing them, but having them actually do some sort of activity or something like that. That's an environmental portrait. The next type is a studio portrait. In a studio, we set up everything. It is a very controlled, specific environment. So we have a backdrop, we have lighting, we tell the model what to wear, we tell the model how to pose. Everything is very controlled in a studio setting. Now at school, I would have different studios set up for you with the lights and the backdrops and even props or like whatever you want to play with. Now, that does not mean that you can't do a studio portrait at home, because you sure can. Grab a tablecloth, grab a sheet, find a wall that's blank or has a really cool texture, grab a lamp, take the shade off of it, grab a flashlight or a big utility like I had in my video when I did our product photography. You can set up a studio at home. I've had people do that a ton of times, and it could actually be quite fun. Watched a bunch of videos on YouTube about like using dollar store items to make your own studio. Watched this girl like paint her own backdrop on a dollar store plastic tablecloth, all kinds of crazy stuff like that. So you could have a lot of fun making your own studio. for your portraits. Think of it like your product photography, except with a person instead of an object. Next type, candid portraits. Candid portraits are not posed, not set up. They're like the opposite of studio portraits. It's like capturing a moment in time that just happens. And capturing a person, like not really knowing that you're taking their picture, or not really, you know, realizing or even caring that you're taking photographs, and they're just kind of doing their thing, right? This is a great way to take some awesome natural looking portraits as well. Beware though with the candid portrait. Now, we don't want to like hide in the bushes and try to, you know, sneak up on people and take their portrait. That's not the kind of thing we're talking about with candid portraits. We also don't want it to look like, you know how like when you're watching TV and you pause it and it's like, you know, the most awful, ridiculous face on a person because you paused it in the middle of them talking or something. We don't want those. We want flattering, candid portraits, right? You don't want to hide, and you don't want to scare somebody, and you don't want them to look like you just paused your Netflix show. What you do want though is to maybe just be there taking pictures and take pictures all over the place until people that like kind of start to ignore you and ignore you taking pictures, and then you can just go ahead and take their pictures and they won't even know it, or they won't even care. Or you could just tell them what you're doing and tell them to ignore you, because that would be a good candid portrait as well. Okay? Candid portraits. Next up, pose portrait. A pose portrait is similar to a studio portrait, except you can pose a portrait anywhere. So a pose portrait is you pretty much telling the model what you want them to do, how you want them to stand, how you want them to move, how you want them to look at the camera or not look at the camera. Maybe a pose portrait even has to do with like costume, like this portrait in my example right here. But it can be anywhere. Maybe it's outside, maybe it's inside, maybe it's, you know, but it's not really a studio setting. It's like posing a portrait elsewhere, right? So that gives you a lot of options for a posed portrait. Last one, self-portraits. You've all taken selfies. I know you have. This is not a selfie though. This is a self-portrait. There's a difference. So instead of like crazy bathroom selfies where you're like, you know, making duck faces at the camera, let's do something a little more set up and a little more meaningful and a little more creative is what I would like to see for a self-portrait, right? I know you have your camera, right, or your iPad, but I believe there is a self-timer setting on your cameras and your iPads on your phones, I mean, that you could use, you know, or you could also use it just like selfie, sort of. But get creative with this. Do something different with this. Do something I've never seen before. And of course, make sure it shows us your personality, who you are in your own portrait. And sometimes maybe that's the hardest thing to do because it's you, right? Some things to think about when you're photographing models. So right now we're doing portrait photography and you have to work with another person, right? So when you're working with another person, you're throwing the human element in there. So you actually have to like communicate with another person, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But when you're photographing this person, things you need to think about, because we don't always think about these sort of things because we're always so consumed with like the actual person and talking to the person and making sure the person looks good. We forget things like controlling our background or controlling our lighting or placing our subject in the frame in an interesting way. I love this photograph because of the way like her hair goes off one corner and you follow the edge of her face all the way down to her neck, all the way down to her arm, and then down to her knee, and then it glides you off the frame on the other side. Like, I love this picture because of the subject placement. That's why I put this here. Point of view. Typically most portraits are at eye level. That doesn't mean they have to be though, but think about facial features, because a lot of times if you start playing with really weird or different angles, it changes the features of the face. There's actually a really cool video that I put in your Schoology folder that talks about like how to make your legs look longer by changing the angle of your camera, how to make your eyes look bigger, how to make your nose look smaller by changing the angle of your camera. and your point of view. So think about that and just don't distort facial features with the point of view of your camera, okay? Let's go back to controlling lighting for a little bit. Use what you have, you guys. Use a lamp. Use a flashlight. Use your cell phone light. Use the sun. Use a white poster board or a piece of aluminum foil to bounce the light off of the sun and onto your subject so you have nice lighting, right? Use a flash. Use the flash on your camera. See what it does, right? Don't forget about lighting here. Lighting is so important in portraits, and you want to make sure that it's flattering lighting, that you're not creating shadows that are real nasty in the wrong places, like under the eyes or under the nose or something like that. Working with a model. So we're talking about another human here. And you have to be in charge. You have to tell this human what to do. You have to make them look good in the portrait. You also have to make them feel comfortable. So before you work with a model, have a plan. Maybe even look up some poses. I have so many Pinterest boards of like different poses for families or different poses for couples or kids or that sort of thing, right? So it's okay, especially when you're first doing portraits, to mimic a pose that you already saw, or keep a whole bunch of examples and be like, I want you to do this in your picture, you know, whatever. Be in control, give lots of direction. Don't ever say to your model when your model's like, okay, what do you want me to do? I don't know, go ahead and do whatever you want. Don't say that. They need you to tell them what to do. That's your job as the photographer. Tell them what to do with their face, with their hands, how to move. Most of the people you're going to be photographing are not professional models, so they do not know what to do in front of the camera. So that is now your job, okay? Tell them the goal of the image, what you want it to look like. Have a little conversation with them first. Show them examples. Talk about what you're trying to do here. You know, talk about, I want your personality to come out in this picture. What do you think, you know, how would you describe yourself? You know, something like that. Set everything up before you start talking to your model. Nothing ruins a good shot like, you know, having your model show up and then be like, ooh, wait, I need 10 minutes to set up the studio first. And then they're just sitting there waiting for you. So think ahead, set everything up, know what you want to do, have a plan. Talk to them and make them feel comfortable. This, I think, is going to be one thing that you guys are probably going to have the advantage to right now because you're at home with your family, and I am assuming that most of these portraits are going to be with your family. So you might have an easier time talking to them and making them feel comfortable. When we're at school, we're like trying to pull friends out of other classes or use people in the photo class, and sometimes it gets a little awkward. You know, tell them jokes, make them feel comfortable, you know, make them laugh, give them compliments, you know, that sort of thing. Try to get the expression, the natural, real, genuine expression. Expression is everything. Your goal is to capture your model's true personality. Now, we all know who this lovely lady is. This is Marilyn Monroe, right? We've seen a million pictures of Marilyn Monroe, and she's usually jumping around, laughing, flirty, you know, like waving her skirt around, being cute, and Marilyn Monroe. This is Richard Avedon's picture of Marilyn Monroe. He was Marilyn Monroe's photographer. A lot of celebrities have photographers that actually like follow them around and take most of their pictures. And Richard Avedon was Marilyn Monroe's. He actually called this photograph the real Marilyn Monroe. And here is what he said about it. He said, for hours she danced and sang and flirted and did this thing. She did Marilyn Monroe. And then there was this inevitable drop. And when the night was over and the white wine was over and the dancing was over, she sat in the corner like a child with everything gone. I saw her sitting quietly without expression on her face, and I walked towards her, but I wouldn't photograph her without her knowledge of it. And as I came with the camera, I saw that she was not saying no. So he saw like the real Marilyn Monroe behind her mask of flirty fun Marilyn Monroe that she liked to show everyone. Now, I'm not saying that you need to get this deep with your photographs, but this is just an example of how when the camera turns on, a lot of us, we tend to put on that mask and act a different kind of way. So a good portrait photographer can pull out the real personality of the model, right? These are some Steve McCurry photographs. We've talked about Steve McCurry before. He's a National Geographic photographer. This one over here on the left is his Afghan girl, maybe his most famous portrait ever. But I do want to point out with Steve McCurry, he travels the world. He travels the world with little equipment and photographs complete strangers. Most of the time don't even speak his own language, and can get these fantastic portraits because he spends a little time and gets to know these people and puts them in the right setting with the right natural light, and gets them to act a certain way in front of his camera, and his photographs are just phenomenal, right? Okay, happy shooting, get creative, pay attention to the technical things in this project. Have fun photographing a person, which is kind of crazy. A little bit different than what we've been doing, huh? So here we have your folder, okay? And in your folder, there's a copy of the presentation I just showed you. And here's the portrait photography assignment sheet. We're gonna go there right now. Now, this assignment sheet looks like a lot, but all it is everything that I just said to you in this video. It's just a recap of what to think about and what to do when you're photographing. So I'm gonna scroll to the bottom, which is your requirements, okay? So for this project, you have to turn in 4 portraits. I'm going to change this right now on the spot, give you a little, yes, 3 different types of portraits. So you can go ahead and, since you have to have 4 portraits, you can make 2 of them the same type. So when I say types of portraits, I'm talking about environmental, candid, studio, posed, self-portrait. Those are the types of portrait. Pick 3, okay? You must use at least 2 different models. So if you're doing a self-portrait, you are one model and then you're photographing somebody else. You could use more than 2 if you've got, lots of family and friends around you. You go ahead and use more than 2. We're allowed to gather in groups of 25 now, so whatever. Not saying you have to for this project. That would be up to your parents, I suppose. So 3 different types of portraits, 2 different models. Make adjustments to improve skin tones. Retouch photos to remove blemishes, dark shadows, or distracting objects. You can also change your portraits creatively, make them sepia tone, black and white, color changes, that sort of thing. Don't overdo the retouching effects, especially keep special attention to the skin tone. You don't want to turn somebody like orange or like a really odd like gray skin tone. So pay attention to the skin tone. Don't turn in purple people, okay? Keep them realistic looking. Now typically we would be learning some skin retouches in Photoshop and some cool things to do in Photoshop with portraits, but because we don't have Photoshop, we can't do that. I think I do have a Photoshop video from a while back. I'll try to dig that up and put it in there in case any of you do want to use Photoshop, because you can download it on your computers and use it. But I know there's a ton of apps out there that are made to improve skin tone and retouch portraits and that sort of thing. So, don't give me like a fake Snapchat filter or anything stupid like that, but you could find one of these cool apps, maybe even share with us which apps are fun to work with. Okay. All right, also in your Schoology folder, you have a folder called Portrait Photographers. There are links here to different portrait photographers. These guys are your inspiration. This is Art Becker. He's a friend of mine, used to live in Erie, now lives in Florida, does awesome work. Check him out, he's real cool. Used to do more portrait work, now he does architecture. Right? Jennifer Dwork lives down the road. Her son Andrew is a senior. She does some really phenomenal studio portraits and some just amazing lighting, right? Steve McCurry, we've talked about before, National Geographic portraits, candid portraits, posed portraits on location, that sort of thing. Annie Leibovitz, one of my absolute favorite photographers. She has photographed all the celebrities. She used to work for the Rolling Stone and she used to work for Vogue. Still working today. Does like just when you click on this, you're gonna recognize like 90% of her photographs. She's pretty amazing. Okay. After that, I have a video folder here, right? The first video is the PBS Art of Portrait Photography. We would actually watch this in class. It's not too long, but it talks about different portrait photographers and the different things that they do. And it's really cool because it just shows you so many different ways to shoot a portrait, right? Photoshop by Adobe. This is hilarious. You have to watch this. It's a fake commercial, which shows you everything that is wrong with portrait editing. And it's just hilarious. You got to watch it. How to pose friends who aren't models. This is a great one too, because guess what? You're going to pose your friends who aren't models. Hey. So they give you some really great tips here. I just found these two. These are new. Simple at-home photo hacks. This is like a really fun, it's really long, but it's so much fun to watch. It's like those Jordy videos that we were watching with the trick photography. So this one is like all those cool little tips and tricks, but it's all with like portraits and people, which are super fun. You know, and it's fast and it's to music and it just shows you one right after the other and it's really cool. This last one, portraits around the house. This one's kind of fun too. The guy's a little odd and it is longer too. But he takes this model around his house and nothing that he does is planned. He's just kind of like, hey, we're going to take some portraits in the house. I'm going to randomly do this and see what I can come up with. And then him and his friend and his mom just get really creative and start like throwing things together and like find different niches in the house to like deal with and light that's coming in to use in his photographs and really cool. Like you could probably, you know, fast forward through a whole bunch of this stuff, but still get the idea of what he's doing. So this folder and the portrait photographer folder are your inspirations. So please look through those. I know there's a lot there, but portraits, guys, portraits are a little bit more challenging. So it might take a little more planning and a little more effort on your part to come up with some decent portraits, right? So seniors, you guys are going to do some portraits and turn them in, and you're also going to update your Adobe Spark and turn that in by Friday. Friday is your last day to turn anything in. That goes for missing stuff too, and that's just for seniors. Everybody else, we're going to work on this project as hard as you can, do a really great job with it, turn it in by the deadline, which I will have up, and yeah, and then we'll just move on next week. We'll decide what we're doing next week, okay? So I can't wait to see what you guys do with this one. It's going to be great. Talk to you soon.